The last of our basic selection tools are the edge detection and color tools. So if I click on the tool just below the lasso, choose the magic wand tool. Now I have this gray gradient to show you about tolerance because tolerance comes into play in more areas than just the magic wand. Essentially the magic wand works by you click somewhere and then it will pick that pixel and then the pixels that are near to that brightness out to a certain way, and you can increase how much it changes or how much it selects by increasing the tolerance or decreasing the tolerance if you want a smaller selection. And of course, like everything else, if you want to add to it, you can hold down Shift. If you want to take away, you can hold down Option. But let's deselect and I'll show you a couple things about this tool. The options up here that you haven't seen before are contiguous and sample all layers. So to demonstrate that, I have a layer with 3 squares on it that are bright yellow, and then a 4th layer with another yellow square on it. And I'm going to click so I'm on this layer that has 3 squares. And with my wand tool, if I click on one of these, it will select it. And I can hold down Shift to add the other 2 to my selection. But if I go to add the 4th one, it will select not what I want, because all this wand tool is looking at right now is this layer right here. If I want it to look at everything, like there's no layers, it was just a flat object, I could click Sample All Layers, and now I could come in and add these even though they're not on that same layer. If you deselect again, the contiguous option, if you uncheck that, means that when you click on an area, instead of looking for an edge where that will end that selection, it grabs that color everywhere that it can. And if I have sample all layers, it will do it for the whole document. So typically when you're working with wand tool, the anti-alias contiguous options are turned on and sample all layers is turned off. And that's pretty normal. So to put this into action, I'm going to grab my balloon file here, and I could increase my tolerance so that when I click I get a bigger selection, and then I'll hold down Shift and click in a couple of the areas that I don't have. Now this is ending right at the edge of the balloon because the blue behind it is a significantly different color. There's quite a contrast. So now I have just my balloon selected, and I could do anything at this point. I could copy it up to its own layer, or I could go into my hue and change the hue. So I've got something selected, now I can affect it. And that is the wand tool. It has sort of a limited use. Typically if you've got a really detailed object, such as this next file we're going to look at, the wand tool is not going to work very great, and I'll show you why. So here I have my wand tool, I hit W to get it. If I click on it, you know, it just looks like a mess. So I'm going to hit Command D and show you the other tool here, which is the Quick Selection tool that's logged there with the wand. When you move your cursor over your canvas, you should be able to see a circle. If you can't, hit Caps Lock, and that will bring the circle back. This one is a little different than the eraser or other brush tools we've looked at because you can't right-click to change the size of it, but you can hold down Option and Control to change the size, or come up here and change it here. Okay, well, size your brush so that it fits comfortably within the area of this driftwood, and then click once, and you'll notice it acts a lot like the wand tool. What this one looks for instead of a difference in grays is it looks for contrasting edges. And if you just click again, it will automatically start adding to your selection, and you can kind of paint in your selection. And then if you wander off, you can hold down Option to get the subtract version of this tool, and then letting go will automatically go back to adding. So unlike the other tools, you don't actually have to hold down Shift to add. Once I've made my main selection, I'm going to move in a little closer and get a smaller version of this tool to do some fine detail. Now you'll notice I clicked once on here, but it selected all of this up here. I'm going to only try a couple times to get that to do what I want, because sometimes this tool just doesn't have the information that it needs, and it's faster to switch to a lasso tool to fix that. But we're working with the quick selection tool, so I'm going to do it that way. So I'm just running around the edge of this. I'm holding down pan so that I am panning around my object, and then I'm holding Option to delete areas, or if I run into a chunk of wood that hasn't been added, I'll hold down, or I won't even hold down Shift. It will just automatically do that when I click and drag. Like this area, for example. I'm not going to spend a ton of time on this because we're going to use that nifty little Refine Edge tool. So instead of copying this up to its own layer and turning the background black, we're going to skip a couple of those steps and go right to the Refine Edge tool. So grab one of your selection tools and hit Refine Edge. You can also get this by holding Command Option and clicking R. So Command Option R is a shortcut. You can change your view to whatever is comfortable for you. I like working with the black and white, and typically when I'm refining an edge, I start by shifting it in just a little bit and then increasing the radius just a tiny bit. Radius goes a long ways. And then playing with the options like smooth and then contrast to try and get rid of some of the jaggediness around that selection. Now I don't want to go too far with smooth. If you do, you'll get a really sort of muddy selection, which is not the point of this. We're just trying to get rid of that little halo and the jaggedy bits. And click OK. Now that we've got our selection made, you can see that the pixels outside of it are what we want to delete. So I'm going to go to Select and Inverse. So anytime you think you want to delete to affect the things outside of your selection, go to Inverse or Command-Shift-I, and then we are ready to go. So I'm going to show you how to turn your background into a regular layer so that you can make it transparent. So if you, right now with background where it says background in italics, if we hit the delete key, I'm going to get this question, what do I want to do with this? This is one of those effects of the background layer. So what we really want to do is turn it into a regular layer. I can do that by just double clicking on it and then clicking OK. And now it's a regular layer, and I can hit delete and end up with a transparent surrounding of my object. And then Command D. Alrighty, but we're not quite done because usually when we extract an image, it's to put it over something else. So I have a picture here of beach sand. I'm going to select everything by Command A and then Command C to copy and move back to my other file and paste, Command V. And this will add the layer above whatever layer was currently active, and I need to drag it below that driftwood. Right now the driftwood looks like it's floating on top of this. It doesn't quite look like it's part of this image, and the reason for that is because it is, if we look at the color of this driftwood almost has a bit of a red tinge to it, where the rest of this has kind of a yellow tinge. So I'm going to click on this layer and go into levels to change that. So Image, Adjustments, and Levels, or Command L. This is one of those I'm not really sure which one of these will affect it, so I'm just going to click on my channel here and go to red and start moving things around because it looked like it had too much red. So I've grabbed my mid-tone slider and I've moved it a little to the right, and I can check and uncheck my preview, and I can tell that actually helped quite a bit. So now it looks like it belongs to the same lighting as the rest of this image. The next thing we want to do is add some drop shadows. Drop shadows are really important when you're trying to make an object look like it belongs in an area. I can see on these rocks on the sand that they've got a cast shadow from the sun, and from the way the shadows move away from this side of the object, I can tell that the sun is on the opposite side and coming this way. The other thing things have, if they're not quite big enough to do a cast shadow, is what's called a contact shadow or occlusion shadow. And to give you an example of that, if you take your first finger and thumb and put them together, you can see where they meet because the two have a shadow that works around it. This can also be seen up in the corners of a room. If you've got in a room with white walls and a white ceiling, if you look at the edges where these come together, there becomes a shadow even though the lighting might be bright. Those are the occlusion shadows. But we're going to add a shadow to this, and because this is a selections lesson, we're not going to do it by just adding a drop shadow from effects. So load the selection of this layer so we get the right shape, and then we're going to use the select, modify, and feather option, because right now that selection edge looks just like the object we have, but we want it to be soft like the edges of a drop shadow, but not crazy amount of soft. So let's try 10 and see how that looks. So we need to create a new layer and get black as our main color by hitting D or clicking on the default, and then filling with Option Delete. We're going to edit fill. Now Command D to deselect, and then move this layer, which is your shadow layer, below the other one, and already that looks a lot better. But I can make this even more convincing if I grab my Move tool and shift this shadow down so it looks like it's kind of pointing in the same direction as this rock up here. Alrighty, really close to being done. There's just one more thing. If I zoom really close in on this shadow, you can see it's not solid black. We can still see some of the details in there. So it's really important to remember anytime you're creating shadows that real shadows aren't black. Even if you're looking at a photograph, it looks like it has black, your eye doesn't ever look at a shadow and go, oh, that's solid black. So make sure you're on this layer that has the shadow, and then let's change the opacity here by clicking on it and dragging down just a little bit to see what looks right. Okay, that looks pretty good. I know we really haven't hit blend modes much, but just a hint, a really good drop shadow made this way looks even better if you change the blend mode to multiply. And I know it's a small thing, but there will be times down the road that that will really matter. So if I Command 0 to zoom back, there we go. We've got a drop shadow and driftwood and a replaced background. And we've covered the last of our basic selection tools.